Award-winning German photographer Michael Wolf has a passion for capturing the essence of everyday life in megacities. Since 2003, he has been working on photography projects focusing on the Hong Kong identity. In this lecture, he shares some of his work around Hong Kong's buildings and back alleys, portraying the resourcefulness of grassroots Hong Kong people in their creative use of everyday objects and limited spaces.
So my name is Michael Wolf. I've lived in Hong Kong for 22 years. I came here in 1994. 2003, I decided to stop working as a commercial photographer. I had a lot of ideas, and one of the main events of 2003 was SARS. I don't know if you remember it. SARS came to Hong Kong the beginning of 2003, and it came quite close to our family because the father of one of my son's best friend died. And my wife got very scared because she said, look, it's so close, it's already in our school. I'm not staying in Hong Kong any longer, I'm going to go back to Europe and wait till it's over. And I had been in Hong Kong for 8 years and had suddenly realized that I'd lived in this very interesting city without doing any personal project, without photographing Hong Kong at all. Basically, I would always travel to mainland China or to Southeast Asia, work on stories, then come back to Hong Kong and edit them, and then send them off to the magazine. And I would use Hong Kong to rest and to recover, you know, before I went on the next story. So I felt very guilty, and I decided to stay in Hong Kong. I sent my wife and son to Germany and started working on my own vision of Hong Kong. And the first project I worked on was architecture of density. And when I began photographing it, this was close to where I lived. This is Chung Kwan O, and I lived just over the hill, Clearwater Bay. And this was a wonderful area for me to start shooting because it had such dense architecture, and it was almost a wasteland, a whole new settlement. It was Junk Bay, you know, it's built on landfill, more or less. And when I started photographing in the beginning, I photographed the buildings like this. I was just trying to describe them. And then I started cropping it, and it turned into this picture. Another example, this is the building, industrial building in front of the Eastern Harbor Tunnel entrance on the left-hand side. If you photograph it like this, it's a mere description of a building. But if you crop it, you have a building which is much more than or a photograph which is much more than a description, it's a metaphor. And that's what I wanted. I didn't want to merely describe buildings, I wanted to create a metaphor for life in megacities. And once I had figured that out, I photographed everything that way. And the buildings become much more interesting because you have no idea how large they really are because you see no sky and you see no horizon. So I would go out every day, and the important thing is that you're more or less parallel to the building, but I was very lucky because Hong Kong has so many hillsides. So I would spend days just hiking with my backpack with my camera in it and tripod, and I would walk around the hills until I found a building which was quite close, and then I would photograph it. I worked on this project, and the problem, of course, was how to earn money, because I said I'm not interested in doing commercial work anymore. I really wanted to focus on my own projects and develop my own vision. And the only way to earn money is either you get a job or you try to earn money through the art business, I call it, through galleries. And I was quite lucky. In end of 2004, I found a gallery in San Francisco who was willing to take some of this architecture of density to an art fair in the United States. And the pictures sold very well. So I was relieved of a lot of financial pressure to earn money. So I could sell my prints and I could continue working on my projects. And I showed them in many different places. I showed them at art fairs, and I had a few shows, and I always went to the openings, and one of the first questions people asked me was, how do people live inside these buildings? What does it look like inside? So I decided to do a project, or I intended to do a project in Hong Kong just called 100 Interiors. But as you all know, the people in Hong Kong are notoriously afraid of the press. They don't like the press. Afraid is the wrong word. So it's next to impossible just to go to these housing estates and knock on doors and saying, hi, I'm Michael Wolff, I want to come and take a picture of how you're living. It just doesn't work. So I quickly realized I have to find some other way. And then in 2006, I think in February, a friend of mine called me, a social worker, who said, Michael, have you ever heard of the Shep Kip Mei housing estate in Shep Kip Mei? And I said, well, I've been there, but I'm not really aware of it. He said, well, it's going to be torn down. And all the residents of the Shep Kip Mei housing estate have to leave on May 1st of 2006. And I researched it a bit, and it was very interesting because it's Hong Kong's oldest housing estate, built in 1954. It consisted of, I think, 38 blocks, each one 8 stories high. The school's always on the top floor, on the roof. And I had the same problem. I knew I'd have the same problem there getting in, but this social worker friend of mine, whose name is Meg Fu, he said, I know a social worker at the housing estate who's willing to help you. And that greatly facilitated doing this project because Christine knew all the residents. And in April, we started working. I think it was April 22nd or 23rd. And we basically had 8 days to work on this project because on May 1st, everyone had to be out. And we basically went from door to door, and Christine introduced me in Cantonese. This is Michael Wolff. He's doing a documentation of the housing estate before it's empty, before it's torn down. And would you be willing to be photographed? And surprisingly, 80% of the people said yes, no problem. And I very quickly discovered, and this was what made the project especially interesting, this is the floor plan, that basically the rooms were 10 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet. And they all had the same floor plan, which is something which is really good for a project like this, that the conditions are the same for every room, because then you can practice a bit of sociology. You know, what do all rooms have in common? What is a predominant color? How do people arrange their things? What are storage solutions? There's all kinds of interesting sociological information you can glean from these images. And it's also a great title, 100 by 100. So I knew I had to photograph 100 rooms more or less in 8 days. And in the end, I photographed 127. And then I thought it might be interesting to also have a short questionnaire, which Christine went after I photographed and asked the people for their answers. And it was just 4 questions. It was, how old are you? How long have you lived here? What is your profession? And why do you like living here? And what really struck me is that most of the people liked living there because of the neighbors, because of the sense of community. And most of them didn't want to leave, even though it was only 10 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet. It was a really small space, but it had open balconies so you could walk along, look in. Many were elderly, so they had the feeling if they were ill, the neighbor would look in, go to the market for them. It was really a really nice atmosphere there, and most of them were very unhappy that they had to leave. And I just love these different storage solutions that you have here. Really, because you have to make do with so much space. Everything has to be foldable. Every single empty space is used. It's like a tangram, many of these apartments. And I love it. This one is even subdivided. And really important for me was I briefed the people. I didn't have much time. I had maybe 5 to 10 minutes for each portrait because I had so many apartments I wanted to go to. So I always tried to position the camera in the same place. I opened the door. I put the tripod inside the door frame. I asked the inhabitants to sit on a chair somewhere in the middle of the room, and I asked them to look neutral. I said, don't think of anything. I don't want you looking happy. I don't want you looking sad, because I didn't want you to think too much about the spiritual condition of the people. I wanted you more to look at the environment. I take this very seriously, and I really love Hong Kong. And my pictures, I don't make fun of people. I'm really trying to explain their situation. And you know, there's an incredible poverty in Hong Kong. You know, between the 1% and the working class, it's a huge difference. And these people have to get by with very little money. And so you have to make do. You can't just go and buy something new all the time. You have to use plastic bags, things you find. You have to recycle things. So there's a lot of resourcefulness and creativity in Hong Kong. In the beginning, I had this headline, Hong Kong Identity. I used to do these talks, and they were always under the umbrella of life in megacities. But the longer I've been in Hong Kong, and I think over the past 3 years, the question of Hong Kong identity has become more and more important for me. I've been here for 22 years. It's the longest I've lived anywhere in my life. If you ask me where my home is, I say my home is Hong Kong. And I deeply identify with Hong Kong and what happens here. If something old and beautiful is torn down, it hurts me because it's my city. And I want my city to maintain this interesting characteristic. The problem is there are quite a few forces working against this. One is the Urban Renewal Authority, which tries to brainwash us all into convincing us that it's going to build a better city. But in the process, it's really destroying everything which is unique to Hong Kong. Look at Wan Chai, for instance, what Wan Chai has turned into. One of my favorite districts is Sham Shui Po. It's really a very, very interesting place to go. Wonderful Dai Pai Dongs and shops, and it's not so overwhelmed by all these corporate restaurants. But I did a bit of research, and 50% of Sham Shui Po is already bought by developers. And if you go up Old Castle Peak Road, which is sort of the border to Shep Kip Mei, you already see whole blocks that have been torn down. And it's really sad because those are the areas which are unique to Hong Kong and which give it a unique characteristic and flavor. And once they're gone, I think the Hong Kong government ideally would like Hong Kong to be like Singapore. Extremely clean, rules to follow. Everything which is somehow improvised and appears messy should be hidden. And if that happens, Hong Kong just becomes a very dull place which looks like anywhere else. So that's sort of really at the top of my concerns, what's happening here. The Graham Street Market in Central, Hong Kong's oldest market, is such an interesting place to go, but many of the buildings have been torn down and there are new developments going up. So Hong Kong is changing much faster than in the beginning. In the beginning, it would take 3 or 4 years for me to notice a change, and now I'm noticing it after I leave. When I go away sometimes for 4 months over the summer, I come back and there's a whole new block torn down, or my favorite back alley is gone. Things like that. And I think the other big issue here is mainland China and its influence over Hong Kong. I'm sure you're aware that since 1997, more than 1 million mainland Chinese have come to Hong Kong and settled down here on one-way permits. I'm not against mainland China per se, but I think if you have someone coming to Hong Kong at the age of 25 or 30 and moving into Sham Shui Po, for instance, he or she is not going to identify with that neighborhood because it's not his neighborhood. He comes from somewhere else. He identifies with the neighborhood where he was born in. So he's not going to care so much for the favorite family restaurant which has to move out because the rents go up. It doesn't really bother him. So what's happening is there's this dilution of Hong Kong culture. And, but I'm very, very happy that the consciousness of the people I talk has really changed. 10, 15 years ago when I would ask young people, you know, what do they like about Hong Kong, they would say, oh, we don't really like Hong Kong, we like Tokyo. We want to be like Tokyo. But all that has changed. In the past, I would say in the past 5 years or so, people really have realized what's going on in this city and are much more aware of what's going on and are already willing to fight for it. Look at the umbrella movement. For me, it was one of the most important things which have happened in Hong Kong in decades. So I think one always has to be aware of this issue of identity, and one has to take care to nurture it and to keep it and to be aware of it. The architecture, it's not replaced with something which fits in there, because you can earn much more money if you tear down an 11-story house and put up a 60-story house. You can maximize your profits, but you lose the flavor of the city. So you lose these unique characteristics, what make Hong Kong special and different from any other place. So all these things are issues which I deal with in my pictures, where I try to make both outsiders and insiders, I consider us insiders, to make us aware of what is unique and special to Hong Kong. The corner houses as well, many of these are already gone. This one is still there, actually. This one they refurbished quite well. They facelifted. This is also Shep Kip Mei, Sham Shui Po at the border. This is Aberdeen. But they're beautiful. They're just, you don't see this type of house anywhere else in the world. They're anonymous architects, more or less, but they really, it's so beautiful, huh? Christ, love, home for the aged. This is down by Kai Tak Airport, close by. This one's gone. See still the illegal dwellings up here? Those were good times as well, huh? The color schemes, I love the Hong Kong color schemes. This one has totally been repainted. It's down in Wan Chai on Johnson Road. But I prefer this one with the old signage. This was a house which just had Chinese medicines. The whole thing was a Chinese medicine house. I always thought it was a church in the beginning, because of this. Then someone educated me. This is by Olympic. It's such a beautiful house. When you see it from the top, it almost looks like a kidney. It's like a 50s design. It's really, really beautiful. This is also Shep Kip Mei. See, and this is a beautiful type of architecture here. And if you tear all this down and have the new residential buildings, it's gone. You know, you're losing something unique to Hong Kong. Now this is also a very nice one. Just a bit farther down from Hong Kong. And here you can see, this was one of my favorites. I mean, it was like this old man tipping over almost, and all this. Look at this little illegal balcony here, hammered together out of wood. It's so beautiful. I would go by there so often to look. The shops down here, the overhang, and this is after it's been refurbished, you see, and all the original windows are out. It's just a much more boring building. The signage is gone. So this is before and after. So I think all these things are important, and I think I don't have anything against urban renewal if it's done carefully and with great sensitivity, that you really think about what you're tearing down, what you keep. I know it's very expensive, and I know that many of these older buildings they're fire traps. They're more or less slums if you go in there. It's bad concrete, so things are falling apart. People have subdivided, 1,000 square foot flats into 6 different flats with cardboard. So the living conditions are quite horrible. So of course one needs to figure out a way to change this, but just radically tearing down whole neighborhoods isn't the way to go. Hong Kong government has so much money, and I think one really has to they're working now with the Department of Architecture and Preservation and Conservation at Hong Kong U with Ho Yen Lee and Linda Stefano, who write the essays for many of my books. They consult the government on heritage sites, but still I think way too much is being torn down, and it's really dramatically altering the character of the city. So those are 3 projects I did more or less in the 3 or 4 years after I stopped working as a commercial photographer. And I also began in 2003 working on a very large project about Hong Kong's back alleys. The back alleys have always fascinated me because I felt they were a type of no man's land where no one intervened. You could park anything you wanted. You could park your carts, you could dry your mops, you could put chairs there, and no one would care. What I really like about Hong Kong is that the Hong Kong people are always testing the limits, of the rules. And it's out of necessity because you just don't have enough space here. So if you walk down the street and you see the shops, anywhere, Kings Road and North Point, anywhere you see shops, the shopkeepers are always extending the shop, with bricks and boards, and trying to get an extra. I think the law probably says you're only allowed to extend the shop by 12 inches. But I often see these, they're not policemen, but they're sort of guards, they work for the government. They always go in pairs, they always have a digital camera, and they have a ruler. And then they go and they measure how much he's extended it, and if it's more than 12 inches, they go, a big fine if you don't move it back. So of course the next week they move it back, and then nothing happens for 4 or 5 weeks, and then slowly they increase it again. It's a game, it's a game. And it's wonderful, and that's what I love. In Singapore, if you do that 18 inches, you get 50 lashes, and you don't do it. But Hong Kong is structured totally differently, and I really appreciate this characteristic here, of just trying to get this space that you need against all rules and regulations. And the back alleys are a bit similar. There's so much stuff which happens back there. All the kitchens open up. People have their big buckets full of frozen meat and squid and vegetables, and it's being cleaned and thawed, and workers take their breaks there. And so for me, it was always an incredible place of discovery. And since 2003 until today, I took 2 photographs today, actually. I always go through back alleys. I often, I take the bus. My studio's out in Chai Wan. The 118 bus stops right in front, and I get on the 118. I get off Nathan Road in Yau Ma Tei, and then I just walk. I crisscross through the back alleys all the way up to Shom Shui Po, and then I head over to Shep Kip Mei, and I come back, and I go back on the other side of Nathan Road, crisscrossing. And every time, I've been into some back alleys, I'm sure I've been more than 20 times, and every time they're different. because they're organic. They're always changing. People are moving things, bringing them in and out, drying their mops in different ways. And I realized it also has to do with Hong Kong identity, that all these things that I see in Hong Kong, they have a certain grammar, and they all have meaning. I mean, that you see laundry hanging from signs, it isn't some creative act, it's just that people have to dry their laundry in front of their windows because their apartments are too small, and then a gust of wind comes and takes away the laundry and deposits it somewhere else. You have the string here. It's not that someone really likes to put beautiful colored string over pipes. The reason is that you don't throw anything away, because you never know when you might need a piece of string the next time. And if you have to go out and buy some, you have to spend another 12 or 14 Hong Kong dollars to buy a ball of string. So it's a sign of thriftiness, for instance. This is a typical back alley. This is just the way I love them. I mean, look at this. Isn't this wonderful? An umbrella used as a shelter for drying the gloves. And here you have the plastic bags jammed behind the pipes. When I see something like this, my heart sings, really. It's beautiful. This is near Southern Playground in Wan Chai, a very nice back alley where you have the restaurant here and it goes off to the side. And if I'm walking here, I'm just attracted like a strong magnet to walk down here because it's much more interesting. But you know, this wealth of stuff which happens, these incredible exhausts, the way they're fitted in here, they're like beautiful sculptures. Here you have the Mops drawing. This is a very narrow one, also in Causeway Bay. You have their shortcuts, I'm sure you all know. You can just cut the block in half by going through them. This is one of the paper recycle ladies. This is in Central. You have to imagine Central is just, you know, a very high-end area, and you have these back alleys which are almost archaic. Here you can see a little makeshift seating arrangement. This isn't, look at this, isn't this beautiful? Huh? This is a little monitor repairman. He repairs monitors. And this is his workshop in a back alley. And he has, you know, he has a makeshift rain shelter. He has an umbrella. You never throw an umbrella away. You always use it for something. Here are the coat hangers. But it's so typically Hong Kong. You would never, ever see this in Singapore. Never. But this is something very beautiful. I sometimes give tours through back alleys. I say it's the real Hong Kong. Really. So the book, Informal Solutions, has 22 chapters, and I'm going to show you a few of them, not all of them, but quite a few. The first one is string. Like I explained before, when you open up something and you have string, you never throw it away, you always hang it somewhere. So you have to imagine all these. When I go through back alleys, I see these things, and I remember I've had 3 TV people, TVB, Reuters, and Now came with me. They said, go show us your favorite back alleys. And I said, sure. And we went through back alleys, and they said, well, where are the strings? And I said, well, over there is one. But they were sort of amongst boxes. This photography, of course, is isolating something extremely and making it obvious. So you really have to have an eye for it. This is also wonderful, you know. You just don't throw a rubber band away. You save it. It makes sense. And the arrangements, I just find something quite beautiful. All these typical Hong Kong colors, you know, the green, the red, the blue. You see it in the buckets as well. Mops, it's one of my favorites. People used to make fun of me and say, you're the mop guy, you know, the mop guy. But the many different ways the mops are dried, because they're ubiquitous. They're all over the city. And they're the most interesting ways that they're dried. But this is a form of creativity. You know, it's a way of using space. See? Look at that, huh? That's quite fancy, the way it's jammed in there. And then they use that for the gloves. This is quite recent. This was taken, I think, 3 or 4 months ago. Also, the way they're just hung up here on nails. Very, very beautiful. So when I walk through Hong Kong, I just see all these things, and I think they're absolutely beautiful and fascinating. You know, it makes the city such an interesting place to walk through. Paris, for instance, is exactly the opposite. Paris is is like some chocolate cream over a city where everything looks the same. There's no messiness, there's no improvisation, everything is hidden behind Haussmannian architecture. And I find the city boring. It's like a Hollywood movie set. And here it's exactly the opposite. Everywhere you go, every meter, you can see things like that. I see them all the time. I go to places many, many times. Here you can see February 2nd, January 2nd, October 10th. It's in Yaomate, right, parallel to Nathan Road. And the first picture I took was this one, and I said, wow, it's amazing. And then I went by a year later, and I said, wow, there's another variation. And then I went by 8 months later, and I saw this one, and I went by again a few weeks ago, and it's again a variation. I just didn't have time to build it in here. But it's so beautiful, you know? It's this unconscious form of creativity, and it serves two purposes. One is you dry the mops, and the second, you keep people from pissing in the cubicles, really. So, I mean, just seeing this makes Hong Kong worthwhile for me, you know, and you just see it everywhere. It's really, really special. A topic which really is one of my favorites is are chairs. The first book I did was called Sitting in China. I collected broken and repaired chairs in mainland China, brought them back to Hong Kong, photographed how people sat in the mainland. You know, most people sit sort of straight and like this. But there you would have people leaning back, tilting, putting their legs up, pushing the chair back. These wonderful ergonomics, much different than you see in Europe, for instance. And this interest carried over into Hong Kong. And it's because here you never throw a chair away. Even if it's missing a leg, you just put it out into the back alley and prop it up against the wall, and then it still works. And all these seating arrangements are more or less for the workers when they have their breaks. They have to go out and sit somewhere. So every back alley has from 2 to 15 chairs distributed. And many of them are modified like this, you know, you put egg cartons on them because it's softer and because it's clean. And when I walk through the back alleys, I always take my breaks on these chairs because they're everywhere and they're empty. You go to Mongkok on a Friday or Saturday night, it's madness. Just millions of people pushing, but you ditch into a back alley and it's absolutely quiet. And you find a chair, you sit there for 20 minutes, read your emails. It's very, very practical and convenient. You know, this is also in Aberdeen. You know, if you're aware of these things, you suddenly see somewhere behind a pole, you see these chairs, which obviously were all thrown out, but they're for the cleaning women who clean up there and where they take their break. See, it even has a little plant. They try to make it homey. These are all Hong Kong chairs, which have all been improvised, and they're wonderful. You know, each one of these is unique. You'll never find another chair like this anywhere in the world. And they've all been modified just so that they are functional. You know, a bucket with cement, the chair jammed into it. Here, this is a stadium chair nailed down to a box. Here, the feet somehow with carpet, pieces of carpet. They're beautiful. They remind me of portraits of older people who've lived a long life and who have a very strong character. That's the way I classify these. This is typical Hong Kong modification, huh? You want to sit on those stairs, you just saw off the legs. It's beautiful, same here. These are the famous three-legged chairs. Really, they all have 3 legs and they're all just leaned against the wall and they all work. So you don't even need to throw a chair away if one leg is missing. You can still use it. And that's an incredible form of resourcefulness. You know, anywhere else you just throw it away, but here you don't. Isn't this beautiful? Out of cardboard, a seating arrangement. It's so, so creative, huh? So simple. You just take the front off the box, and then you have, it's almost like an armchair. And look at this. Picture number 1, picture number 2. Isn't this beautiful? I mean, he just figured out a way. You know, he's selling these metal things, and he figured out a way to make a nice little place where he can sit and observe the foot traffic. And it's so creative. It's just a brilliant design solution. And this is a chair which I found last year nearby Shamshui Po at a market underneath the freeway there. Two chairs jammed into one another. Look at this, it's a broken hacksaw tied in because part of the plastic is broken. I mean, it's just here, there's a splint on it out of wood to make the leg stronger. And at the moment, this is on exhibit in France in a museum for a show, and it was before it was in London in a show. So they're just very, very beautiful objects. As I was mentioning before, these alcoves in the back alleys are all used by people to take breaks, and when you go through them, you'll see them everywhere. And it also has to do with this lack of private space. Most people live in a home with their wives and children, maybe even their parents live there, so you never have privacy. But you do have privacy here, even though it's only a very small space. This was weird. I was walking down a back alley in TST, and I see these things, and I snuck up on them and photographed them, and then on my iPhone, then I showed it to them as two girls. And I said, "Why are you smoking this way? I mean, it looks just weird." And she said, "Oh, you know, we work in a barber shop, and the clients don't like our fingers to smell like cigarettes. So it's very practical. See, it's so practical. You just use this, and then you don't smell." And of course, you also see how hard people have to work here. You know, for that meager 9,000 or 10,000 Hong Kong dollars, you just have to work 12 hours in a nasty kitchen, washing dishes, hour after hour after hour, and you get 5 minutes of break. Just many come out and just crash even if it's only for 10 minutes, you get a little bit of rest. But I see a lot of very tired people. Lost Laundry is a favorite of mine. I was mentioning it in the beginning. You just, when you walk around the city, I noticed at the very beginning, just how much Lost Laundry. This is a whole children's dress that just waved down from sun. Look how it just hooked perfectly into this hammer. Often with whole coat hangers. I remember at the beginning when I was photographing this, I was a bit insecure because I thought, am I making fun of people's accidents? Lose your best sweater to the wind and you can't get it anymore. And then I showed it to a friend of mine, a Hong Kong-born woman, and she almost got tears in her eyes. She said, "Oh, Michael, that reminds me when I was living in a public housing estate as a child. We lived on the 7th or 8th floor, and sometimes from the bamboo pole, a piece of laundry would fall down and it would get hooked on the 3rd floor. And then my mother would phone the woman, say, 'Oh, Mrs. Wang, my socks just fell down.' And then this woman, who was then a little girl, would lower a string down with the clothes, with the clip on it, lower it down, and Mrs. Wang would put the socks on it, and she would pull it back up. So it really evoked these childhood memories for her. And then I realized it was actually something quite okay to photograph. Exhausts is another topic which I really love. They're, for me, these sculptural-like objects, and they have to really adapt because you can't just build the exhausts anywhere. They have to fit into the space available, and they're like archaic dinosaurs or something. It's just grease-covered, but I just love the forms. And this is also very Hong Kong. You keep your chair here. Now we're nearing the end. Storage is a big problem in Hong Kong because you don't have enough space. So one of the topics I photograph wherever I see it is just ways of storing things. You just jam the monitor, jam the spray paint can in the saw behind the aircon support. This floating chairs and a dried fish. It's really, really beautiful. Another floating chair, huh? I really love this one. It's almost surrealistic. You see, and this is one of the women working in the back alley. She works close to the market. At the end of the market, someone had put away 2 oranges. She saw that they were still good. So instead of letting them be thrown away, she took them and stored them in this disused electrical compartment, and she'll pick it up before she goes home. All these are all the soup bowls of the workers stored in the pipes in North Point. This is also very Confucius, you know. Everyone feels guilty if you throw something away. So instead of throwing it away, you jam it in here. You're throwing it away, but not really, you know. It's okay. You know, you see it everywhere. I do it myself, you know. I don't want to litter, so, you know, oh, I can put it on the ledge here. Same with the cups. Now look at this, it's just brilliant. It's just so brilliant, you know. I see these things everywhere in Hong Kong, and it makes the city such an interesting place for me. See, this is obviously someone's little private storage space. You just take 2 boards and you make this little triangular space and you keep your stuff here, and nothing's going to happen to it. And look at this, the way it's tied with string so it doesn't fall down. The different lids. Okay, that's it.